Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's take a look at the topics we are going to discuss today. I have chosen 13 important articles from today's The Hindu newspaper from the Delhi edition. We have 3 big articles which are mains oriented. So we shall have a detailed comprehensive discussion on these articles. And we have several articles lined up which are more relevant for our prelims examination. So before we start this discussion, we have an important announcement. You can see the ticker which is running below. As you can read, we have a free trial access campaign that is going on that is available on the BYJU'S Exam Prep app. Essentially, for 3 days, you will get free access to all the classes, the live classes, the recorded lectures, and the subject-based quiz that is available on our app. All you have to do is register by using the link provided in the pinned comment, and you will be getting 3 days of free access to all the material, the study material that we have to offer. So please take the full benefit of this facility which is being provided. Now, before we begin, I would like to remind you that if you guys are benefiting from this initiative, do support us by pressing the like button, share your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important column from page number 8. This column mainly focuses on the increasing nuclear tensions in the world, and the writer is talking about important concepts such as nuclear deterrence and how the usage of nuclear weapons has been seen as a taboo. And these principles essentially have helped in preventing a possible nuclear war after 1945. As you all know, there's only one instance where nuclear weapons was used, which was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which eventually brought the Second World War to an end. After that, we have never seen any incident of nuclear weapons being used in conflict. The writer is arguing that the concept of nuclear deterrence and the norm of treating nuclear weapons as a taboo has helped in preventing nuclear wars. But today, the tensions are back due to some recent developments. The possibility of a nuclear warfare has gone up, according to the writer, and hence the writer is urging all the nuclear powers to exercise caution and draw lessons from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this is the argument the writer is trying to make. So let's take a detailed look at this article. First, let's understand the context of the writer's argument. Let's understand in what context is the writer presenting this argument. See, last year, Russia invaded Ukraine. And as Russia is a major nuclear weapon state, it has often threatened Ukraine and even the NATO countries with the possibility of using nuclear weapons against them. In the last 1.5 years, Russian President Putin himself has repeatedly made direct and indirect statements indicating Russia's willingness to deploy nuclear weapons if required in the ongoing conflict. So along with that, the tensions between major geopolitical rivals has gone up. The tensions between US and Russia, and as well as the tensions between US and China. The geopolitical tensions have risen, and these countries have even quit some of the arms reduction treaties that were in place. China has accelerated its nuclear weapons program. US and Russia have failed to uphold some of the arms reduction treaties were put in place. And we also have rogue countries like North Korea, which have increasingly threatened several countries including Japan, South Korea and the US. And North Korea is known to break rules. It's known to break the international commitments while displaying and testing its nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. So we live in such a complicated geopolitical environment where the risk of nuclear warfare has increased in the last few decades. So it's in this context that the writer is presenting the argument that we are ignoring the concepts of nuclear deterrence and treating nuclear weapons as a taboo. So the writer is urging all the nuclear weapon countries to draw lessons from the people who suffered in Japan. She's reminding us of the horrific nuclear bombing in 1945, which essentially brought the Second World War to an end. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the month of August 1945 brought immense suffering to the people of Japan. While the US justified this act of war to bring the Second World War to an end and to defeat Imperial Japan, which is committing atrocities all across Asia as a fascist state, but the deployment of such nuclear weapons eventually brought about great human suffering. Because such destructive weapons that can flatten entire cities, they don't discriminate between combatants and non-combatants. Right? The dropping of such a strategic bomb will not only wipe out entire cities, it will spread radiation, destroying the environment, killing thousands of people instantaneously, and causing long-term radiation impact on the region and as well as on the people. In fact, the survivors of the Japanese nuclear bombing are referred to as hibakusha. This is a general knowledge that you should have, because even the movie Oppenheimer has brought back this topic into debate. So UPSC could be motivated because of all these developments to focus on essential concepts in nuclear warfare, such as nuclear deterrence and other related topics. So the survivors of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bombing are called hibakusha, and these survivors, they tell the tale of the immense suffering that nuclear weapons bring about. It's not just during the bombing that people were affected, right? As soon as the explosions took place, more than 70,000 people were killed instantaneously. Following that, millions have been affected. The environment has been severely affected by the radiation. And even today, even almost 7 decades later, several generations have shown the impact of the nuclear bombing. Right? The genetic changes, the mutations which were introduced, not only led to several cancer-related cases, but it has been passed down the generations as well. And even today, you have people in Japan suffering from the impact of the nuclear bomb. So the writer is reminding the nuclear weapon states of this devastating impact. She's asking us to take a look at the hibakushas who are telling the tale of the impact of nuclear warfare, and she's urging countries like Russia and others to take immediate steps to reduce nuclear tensions. Ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, the notion of nuclear deterrence and the norm of treating nuclear warfare as a taboo has been downgraded. It has been reduced, and Russia has shown willingness to carry out such a loose talk, where it has repeatedly made very irresponsible statements regarding the possible usage of nuclear weapons in the ongoing war. See, whether Russia uses the weapons or not, it's a different question altogether. Even though it's a remote possibility, the very fact that Russian president himself is making such statements, where directly or indirectly is indicating that Russia will not hesitate to use nuclear weapons, in itself is a serious risk that threatens the stability in the world and pushes the world towards the brink of nuclear warfare. So in this context, we should understand the concept of nuclear deterrence and how usage of nuclear weapons as a taboo has helped in preventing nuclear wars after 1945. In fact, if you have seen the movie Oppenheimer, or if you've read about the Manhattan Project, which led to the development of the first atomic bombs, Oppenheimer, who led the project himself, suffered from the moral dilemma regarding the impact of usage of nuclear weapons. Right? That is very well depicted as well in the movie, and also it's very well documented in history as well. Now, based on what we understand regarding the impact of nuclear warfare, one pertinent question that comes to mind is that today we have around 9 countries which are believed to possess nuclear weapons. And yet, since 1945, we have never seen a recurrence of nuclear war. Despite very high tensions being prevalent between various countries in the last 70 years, no country has taken the step of using nuclear weapons against another. So that is an obvious question, right? So why hasn't the world seen another instance of nuclear warfare? And there is an answer to it. See, the 9 countries which are believed to possess nuclear weapons includes the P5 countries, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, that is US, Russia, UK, France, and China. Other than that, you have India and Pakistan, then North Korea, and even Israel is believed to possess nuclear weapons. So around 8 to 9 countries are believed to possess nuclear weapons, and their arsenal has increased. Today you have more modern, sophisticated nuclear arsenal with these countries, and yet we have never seen an instance of nuclear war in the last 70 plus years. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is the only instance where nuclear weapons have been used in conflict. Now, what could have prevented nuclear war? How come no country has used nuclear weapons in the last 70 years? The answer lies in these 2 essential concepts. One is the concept of nuclear deterrence, and second is the norm which has been followed and established around the world, where the usage of nuclear weapons has been seen as a taboo, something that is abhorred or prohibited. These 2 essential principles have played a key role in preventing nuclear war in the last 70 years. But now the writer's concern is that these principles are weakening because of Russia's irresponsible behavior. Is that clear? So in this context, you should understand what exactly is nuclear deterrence. UPSC might ask you a full-fledged question on nuclear deterrence and nuclear arms race. See, nuclear deterrence is a principle or a concept in international relations, according to which countries develop, possess, and even deploy nuclear weapons in order to deter their enemies, their rivals, from launching the first nuclear strike. Nuclear weapons, they've often come to be seen as strategic weapons meant only for the purposes of deterrence and not meant to be used in actual warfare. Some of you might wonder, then what's the use of such weapons if you don't intend to use them in actual warfare? Trust me, believe it or not, as a strategic weapon, nuclear weapon is not meant to be used in warfare. It's meant as a deterrent, that is to instill fear in the enemy to prevent them from launching the first attack on you. This is a theory, a concept which has been widely promoted by political scientists and international relation experts since the Cold War days. Because during the Cold War period, from 1950s to 1990s, there were many instances where US and Soviet Union, the 2 major rival superpowers, they came very close to the brink of nuclear war. But what prevented the nuclear war is the concept of nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence essentially means, now let's take a hypothetical situation. Let's say there is a country A, a country B. Now country A, if it builds its nuclear arsenal, establishes credible capability to launch a second strike, to ensure mutually assured destruction in case of a first strike, then it will automatically deter country B from launching a nuclear attack against country A. Is that clear? In this hypothetical situation, imagine there are 2 countries, country A and B, both possess nuclear weapons. Now country A has built deterrence against country B by building its own nuclear arsenal. Country A never intends to use them, but the purpose is to serve a strategic deterrent, to instill fear in country B that if country B were to launch a nuclear attack, then country A promises a credible second strike, an assured second strike which guarantees mutual destruction of both the countries. So when mutually assured destruction is guaranteed in such a scenario, both the countries will take a step back. Because keeping in mind their respective interests and keeping in mind the possible consequences of using nuclear weapons, the other country will be pushed back. It will be deterred from launching the first attack in the first place. It's with this confidence that India has adopted the no first use policy. Or else what's the point of developing nuclear weapons if you're inviting a first nuclear strike? The reason why India confidently has put in place a no first use policy is that we have guaranteed a credible second strike to ensure massive destruction in a second strike if a first strike were to happen on India. So countries build deterrence by proving their nuclear capabilities, and they don't intend to actually use the weapons in warfare. So by establishing deterrence, they are preventing the first nuclear strike. It is this fear which has been instilled in the enemy and rival countries which has prevented nuclear war in the last 70 years. That's why many strategic experts believe that nuclear weapons actually have brought peace. They have reduced the chances of conflict. Now, the only reason why US and Russia have never entered into a direct conflict is because of nuclear weapons. Because they never want to take the risk of elevating the conflict to a possible nuclear level where mutually assured destruction is guaranteed. Same is the case with India and Pakistan. A possibility of an India-Pakistan war is very minimal. Same with India-China as well, given that these countries possess nuclear weapons. If the war were to reach the nuclear threshold, mutual destruction is guaranteed to both the countries. So this acts as a deterrent, a natural deterrent which pushes these rivals back and prevents them from getting into a direct conflict with each other. So in that regard, nuclear weapons, they're not only meant as a strategic deterrent, they have even reduced the possibility of wars and conflicts. So this is one concept or one principle which experts believe that has played a role in ensuring that nuclear weapons have never been used after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's the fear that countries have that the other country will launch devastating second strikes, which prevents the country from launching the first strike. The other principle which has prevented nuclear wars is the norm that has been established with regard to nuclear warfare. After looking at the horrors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world learnt a very important lesson. It became very clear to governments and to the people in general that nuclear weapons are highly destructive. Using such weapons under any circumstance was not seen as justified. Doesn't matter what the other country has done. It could be a fascist Japan. It could be any country committing atrocities. It could be a country threatening global peace and stability itself. But no situation justifies the usage of nuclear weapons. And that is the common understanding that countries have developed. So it became a norm to treat nuclear weapons as a taboo. So countries started looking at nuclear weapons as special category weapons, as unconventional weapons, which is unlikely to be used in a traditional conflict, in a conventional conflict. Given the extensive damage it can cause, its ability to flatten cities, impact the environment, leave behind radiation that affects generations together, it became an accepted norm. It became a moral obligation of sorts around the world to treat the usage of nuclear weapons as a taboo, something that is prohibited morally and ethically. In a way, the dilemma, the moral ethical dilemma that Oppenheimer faced, it came to affect every country, every government as well, and this practice of treating nuclear weapons as a taboo played a role in preventing nuclear wars. But however, the developments of the last 1.5 years is of concern according to the writer. Because the concept of nuclear deterrence is weakening, and there are some countries which no longer look at nuclear weapons as a taboo. At least that is what they are indicating in their statements. If you look at how North Korea is behaving, right? North Korean leader Kim Jong-un makes very irresponsible statements about the usage of nuclear weapons, as if it were child's play. North Korea repeatedly tests ballistic missiles and even nuclear weapons in violation of international law. Now Russia also has joined the list, and right from the very top of the Russian leadership, including Russian President Putin himself, very irresponsible statements have been made regarding the possible usage of nuclear weapons. So this, according to the writer, weakens the strength of nuclear deterrence, and it weakens the principle of looking at nuclear weapons as a taboo. The fear of the writer here is that treating nuclear weapons as a taboo is not under international law. There is no legal basis for it. It's not that there is a UN convention or an international law which is asking every country to look at nuclear weapons as a taboo. Treating nuclear weapons as a taboo is simply a moral, ethical constraint that countries have placed on themselves in the interest of humanity. Because nuclear warfare today in any part of the world will affect the entire world. Given the magnitude of its impact and the sophistication of the weapons and the yield of today's nuclear weapons, which is many, many times more than the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nuclear war in any part of the world will affect the entire world. Given this understanding, countries have placed this moral, ethical obligation on themselves. So there is no legal prohibition on it, there is no international convention prohibiting it. So countries are driven by proportionality and responsibility, meaning they don't use nuclear weapons just for the sake of it. Nuclear weapons will be brought out as a last resort when they have been attacked with nuclear weapons, or when unjustifiable damage has been caused to a country in a war. Only in such dire circumstances, as a last resort, nuclear weapons will be brought in. Which means nuclear weapon states, they look at proportionality. With regard to the response they deploy in a war, they look at proportional response. If another country has launched conventional missiles, right, the country will retaliate with conventional missiles or through other conventional military methods. Countries will never think of using nuclear weapons because they are always concerned about ensuring that the response is proportional to the threat. And most countries are responsible, except for few. You can ignore North Korea and even Pakistan from this list. But the other nuclear weapon states are at least responsible nuclear powers which act rationally. So these are the constraints which has ensured that using nuclear weapons is seen as a taboo around the world. It's seen as a crime against humanity. It's seen as extremely inhuman. And we have the lessons right in front of our eyes. If you look at the generational impact of usage of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it becomes very clear why the world has seen nuclear weapons as dangerous, separate category of weapons. Something which should never be used in conflict. Because it has a generational impact. Thousands and millions will be affected. It's not just about the immediate deaths that will occur, but about the long-lasting impact as well. So the aspect of treating them as a taboo is simply a matter of morality. A moral, ethical constraint that governments have placed on themselves. Governments which are rational, which act proportionally, they themselves have placed this morality and this ethical obligation on themselves. There is no law, there is no international convention prohibiting its usage. Now, given this fact, there is a possibility that rogue states, under irresponsible leaders, they might take the adverse step of using nuclear weapons or at least escalating the nuclear tensions. We have seen this happening in the last 1.5 years. After Russia invaded Ukraine, especially after it suffered reverses in the battlefield, Russia has become very insecure and it has made several direct and indirect statements regarding the possible usage of nuclear weapons. When the invasion began in February 2022, Russian President Putin, he directly said that Russia will not hesitate to use nuclear weapons if required, particularly against NATO countries if they come to Ukraine's support. Over a period of time, especially between September to October of last year, that's when Russia was suffering battlefield setbacks as Ukraine was fighting back with Western assistance. Russia started suffering battlefield losses, which was embarrassing for Russia. During these reverses that Russia suffered, even then direct, indirect threats were given by President Putin, pointing out that Russia will not hesitate from using nuclear weapons in the ongoing conflict. He even indicated that potentially tactical nuclear weapons might be used. See, today, countries have developed tactical nuclear weapons. I told you that usually nuclear weapons are seen as strategic weapons. Strategic weapons are usually long-range weapons deployed over thousands and thousands of kilometers. Even intercontinental deployment will be seen. And strategic nuclear weapons will be of a bigger yield with the ability to flatten, wipe out entire cities. But tactical nuclear weapons, on the other hand, are smaller with limited impact. They are designed to be used in the battlefield. These are usually low-yield nuclear weapons. They will carry a smaller warhead compared to your strategic nuclear weapons, and they are often deployed in a smaller range. They are deployed using short-range delivery platforms to target enemy troops in the battlefield instead of targeting cities. Because when cities are targeted with strategic weapons, even civilians will be wiped out. As I told you, nuclear weapons don't distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. That's why few countries have developed tactical nuclear weapons, as they see it as more acceptable to be used in a conflict. Even Pakistan has developed battlefield nuclear weapons and constantly threatens India as well whenever India seeks to punish Pakistan for its sponsorship of terrorism against India. That is one way in which Pakistan is putting India on the back foot, by reducing the nuclear threshold, by flashing its battlefield tactical weapons, which are smaller weapons with smaller warheads with a shorter yield, which can be deployed in a short range environment, where they can be used in the battlefield against enemy troops that could inflict severe damage on the armed forces and not on civilians. So some countries like Russia, then Pakistan, they see using tactical weapons or even threatening others with tactical weapons as a strategy, something which is acceptable as part of military strategy. But the writer's concern here is that with the prevalence of tactical battlefield nuclear weapons, and with such irresponsible statements being made, and with the presence of constant tensions, there is a possibility where accidents might happen or wrong decisions might be made. Essentially, such governments and leaders are putting themselves under the burden. If they constantly keep talking about using nuclear weapons, right, the supporters will expect the leader to deliver at some point, especially when those countries suffer reverses in the battle. If they are about to witness a failure in the conflict, or if they are about to get defeated, when they are cornered, pushed into a corner, such countries and such leaders who have often used irresponsible statements regarding using nuclear weapons, they might be pushed to a point where they have to prove their capability, their strength, by using nuclear weapons eventually. This reduces the threshold, increases the risk of a nuclear warfare. So that is exactly what the writer is highlighting. Such loose talk regarding using nuclear weapons might be acceptable to some people as a military tactic. They may not actually do it. It's just a way of blackmailing, threatening others as a military strategy. Even Donald Trump, when he was the president, was known to talk very loosely and irresponsibly about nuclear weapons. So such statements coming from major nuclear powers and their leaders is not good news for the world, because it reduces the risk factor. The taboo which is associated with nuclear weapons will go away over a period of time, and we might see a point where some irresponsible country under an irresponsible leader, they might be pushed to a point where they might use nuclear weapons, maybe even battlefield nuclear weapons, which are seen as more acceptable by them. This risks a bigger escalation, bringing guaranteed destruction on both the sides, and it will affect the entire world. Now, thankfully, despite Russia's irresponsible statements, other global powers have acted responsibly, at least in this regard, as far as NATO, US and China are concerned. When Putin was making these statements about using nuclear weapons, NATO countries, especially the United States, guaranteed a response, a very strong response, if nuclear weapons are ever used, but only a conventional response. The US has never said we will retaliate with nuclear weapons or will use nuclear strikes to decimate the nuclear arsenal of Russia. Such statements have never come from US, which could have escalated tensions even further. Even China, for that matter, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called upon all the countries in an indirect message, particularly to Russia, to not make such statements and ensure that we never see the usage of nuclear weapons in combat. So when such big powers like US and China make those statements, it is reassuring, it brings down the tensions and doesn't contribute to the rising tensions. But it's not guaranteed how long this will hold. if Russia were to escalate further, or if another irresponsible country like Pakistan or North Korea were to use or even talk about nuclear weapons in a irresponsible manner, it keeps on reducing the nuclear threshold. Now, what Russia has done is that it has apparently deployed some nuclear weapons in Belarus, in the neighboring country of Belarus. Belarus, which is a close ally of Russia, has apparently provided space for Russian tactical battlefield nuclear weapons to be stationed. And this further increases the tensions. So, at a certain point, where Russia might be on the verge of defeat, or if it is facing a setback, Russian leadership might be pushed to a point, they might be tempted to deploy nuclear weapons to prove their point and to ensure their victory in the conflict. So this only brings mutually guaranteed destruction, right? Because the usage of nuclear weapons will not go without a retaliation. Now, it's very, very important to note that during the heights of the Cold War, in the 1960s, 1970s, the nuclear tensions were extremely high between US and Soviet Union. There was a point where the world had around 70,000 plus nuclear warheads, majority of them with US and Soviet Union. They even came very close to a nuclear exchange. So nuclear war has not been prevented in the last 70 years because of international law, because of a prohibition, or because of responsible behavior. The writer says it is sheer dumb luck that we haven't seen a nuclear conflict. So what comes to our mind is the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1960s, where US and Soviet Union, they came very, very close to exchanging nuclear weapons. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union apparently had deployed nuclear arsenal in Cuba, which was a communist country aligned with Soviet Union, located right next to the United States, right on the east coast of the US. So as Soviet nuclear missiles were being stationed, the US saw this as a major threat, and it countered it with a naval blockade and imposed an arms blockade blocking out the Soviet ships that were delivering nuclear warheads and the nuclear components to be stationed in Cuba. They came very, very close to the brink of war, that too under possible nuclear threshold. Fortunately, the crisis was averted at the last minute. There were many other instances in the 60s, 70s and 80s where US and Soviet Union came very close to a possible nuclear conflict. So the writer is saying that if we haven't seen nuclear war in the last 70 years, it's not because of responsible behavior. It's not because of any international law or prohibition. It's not just because of nuclear deterrence, and not just because of a norm that using nuclear weapons is a taboo. Writer says this is more of sheer dumb luck and timely intervention, right? Because we have a history of near misses. So something like that could repeat if we don't draw lessons from the suffering of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is the core point the writer is making. She's urging all the nuclear weapon states to see what happened to the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and put in place mechanisms to ensure that we never ever witness nuclear conflict. Is that clear? So this is the central argument that the writer is making, and I feel it's a very, very important article for your GS paper, that is for your international relations paper in GS2, and as well as for an essay topic. That's why I've had a detailed, comprehensive discussion so that you should be in a position to bring out this analysis if there were to be a question. Now let's move on to the next article. On the same page, we have a column written by a former Indian ambassador talking about the efforts of United States to establish normalcy and peaceful relations between two major West Asian powers, that is Saudi Arabia and Israel. The writer is mainly focused on the recent attempts of Biden administration to bring a normal relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel. I hope you know that both Saudi Arabia and Israel are major West Asian powers. They have a history of rivalry between them, primarily because of the Palestinian issue. Ever since Israel unilaterally declared independence in 1948 and violated the two-state solution of the UN, right? Since then, Saudi Arabia has had a rivalry and a complicated past with Israel. Not just Saudi Arabia, in fact, almost the entire Muslim world, most of the Muslim countries in the region, right? They even went to war against Israel to fight for Palestinian rights. So even though Saudi Arabia and Israel have reportedly struck a secret peace between them, you don't have formal relations between them. Even today, Saudi Arabia officially does not recognize Israel. There are very few Arab countries that recognize Israel and have diplomatic ties with Israel. So the United States is pushing a new initiative. The Biden administration is putting a lot of effort to officially set up ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel and project this as a major American achievement as far as its West Asian diplomacy is concerned. Now let's understand a little more about this, because these developments, they have an impact on India, because India has major interests in West Asia. We have very, very important ties with Saudi Arabia and Israel. So let's see what efforts US has been making to bring these countries together, what challenges are present, and if they were to normalize the relationship, what would be the impact? According to the writer, there are major challenges for the United States to overcome, because both Israel and Saudi Arabia, they are going through a major challenge internally and in the region. Internally, Israel has been facing a crisis under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu, who is seen as a extremist leader by many, he belongs to the far right-wing ideology, and he has been driving a very controversial conservative policy of Israel that has triggered tensions in the region. Under Netanyahu, illegal Jewish settlements have been accelerated in occupied West Bank, which is in violation of international law. It's in violation of the UN mandate of a two-state solution, and it hits directly at Palestinian rights, at the rights of the Palestinians. So Palestinian territory is being annexed slowly, day by day, by pushing these illegal Jewish settlements, which has attracted a lot of criticism, not just from the Arab states, but even from the United States, which is a very close ally of Israel. The US itself opposes the illegal Jewish settlements that Israel is pushing under Netanyahu. And upon that, internally, there is a major crisis going on as a result of the judicial reforms which is being pushed by Netanyahu's government. Netanyahu believes that Israel's judiciary interferes with the executive through judicial overreach. And to maintain the separation of powers, a judicial reform is being carried out, which according to critics destroys the independence of Israel's judiciary, thereby marking the death of Israel's democracy. This has led to massive protests against the Israeli government, and the United States is not in support of this Israeli policy. So overcoming these challenges being faced by Israel and still pushing Israel to set up ties with Saudi Arabia would be a challenge for the US, right? Because US itself is opposed to these controversial policies of Israel. Similarly, on the other hand, US has difficulties with Saudi Arabia as well. See, traditionally, US and Saudi Arabia are very close allies since 1970s. It was primarily oil trade which brought them together. Traditionally, they have been aligned together, very close to each other. They have been strategic partners for decades, but still, Saudi Arabia has developed differences with the US in the last few years, especially under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS, the current leader of Saudi Arabia. Right? The Saudi kingdom is headed by the king, and the de facto administrator, the ruler, is Crown Prince MBS, or Mohammed bin Salman. So in the last few years, major differences have come up between US and Saudi Arabia. It all started with a controversial killing of a Saudi journalist, Jamal Khashoggi. He was someone who was seen as a critic of the Saudi government. As you know, Saudi Arabia is an autocratic, conservative country where human rights are constantly violated. So Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist who had run away from the country, who had sought asylum in other countries, he would constantly write about Saudi oppression, and apparently he was killed in Turkey at a Saudi consulate. This killing of a journalist was linked with the Saudi government, and apparently it was ordered by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This was the allegation made by the United States and its intelligence agency, the CIA. So as US pinned the killing of the journalist on the Saudi government and the leadership itself, this led to a major divide between the two strategic partners, and since then they have fallen apart. Saudi Arabia has gotten closer to China and Russia and Iran, and this is not good news for American interests. Recently, Saudi Arabia has struck peace with its rival Iran. I hope you know that Saudi Arabia represents the Sunni world. It's seen as the leader of the Sunni world in the region, whereas Iran, being a Shia country, is seen as a leader of the Shia world. So this sectarian divide in Islam translates into divide in geopolitics as well in West Asia, and has often divided the Sunni countries and Shia powers. Until recently, until just a few months back, Saudi Arabia and Iran were arch rivals. Their rivalry was even more serious than India-Pakistan rivalry, right? They would repeatedly target each other's interests. They would wage covert wars against each other to destabilize and destroy each other. But due to China's mediation, as China's profile and influence has grown, China used its influence with these rivals, brought them to the negotiating table, and mediated a settlement that has led to the re-establishment of diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now this is a landmark change which has happened in West Asian geopolitics, and US had no role to play in it. US had been sidelined and China played the role of the mediator. So this undermines American influence. Saudi Arabia has gotten closer to Russia as well, particularly at OPEC plus grouping, in determining oil prices and in determining oil production levels. The high prices benefits Russia and it reduces the impact of Western sanctions on Russia. The US has been very unhappy regarding how Saudi Arabia has helped Russia, worked with Russia at this cartel called OPEC plus. It's an organization of petroleum exporting countries. So these countries determine oil production levels and thereby determine oil prices in the global market. So they have come out with favorable policies by reducing production in order to artificially boost the prices to make more profits. And this has helped Russia in a way to bypass the impact of Western sanctions. So of course US is not happy with this. And more importantly, Syria, which has been the target of US, which pushed Syria into a civil war in 2011, has been brought back into the Arab League just a few weeks back. And it was Saudi Arabia which played the key role. It has played a key role in stabilizing Syria and trying to bring an end to the Syrian civil war. And Syria has been recently admitted back into the Arab League, which is a regional grouping. It signals the growing closeness between the Sunni powers and Shia powers and the rising influence of China and Russia, which undermines American interests. So this is a challenging environment for the US, right? With Israel as well, US has developed differences. In the US, the Jewish lobby is extremely powerful and plays a key role in American presidential elections. So be it the Democrats or the Republicans, they always try to impress the Jewish lobby because Jewish lobby support is critical for any presidential candidate to win the presidential elections. So now Joe Biden is courting Israel as well, but there are challenges, there are differences between US and Israel. So this is the complex dilemma that the writer is highlighting, but US is making several attempts to persuade Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize the ties between them. That's the only way that US can regain back its influence and counter rivals such as China and Russia, whose influence has gone up in West Asia. In this regard, US has achieved one success in 2020 through the signing of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords were mediated by the United States under President Trump, which led major powers such as United Arab Emirates to recognize and set up ties with Israel, which was followed by Bahrain. So UAE and Bahrain, they became the third and fourth countries in the Arab world to recognize Israel and set up ties with Israel. Prior to signing of Abraham Accords, only two countries in the region, that is Egypt and Jordan, Those were the only two countries which had recognized Israel. So UAE and Bahrain signed the Abraham Accords, and even Morocco and Sudan, even they went on to recognize Israel, which was a major achievement for the United States. But after that, China, Russia have displayed their dominance. China has brought rivals like Saudi Arabia and Iran together. Russia has been able to retain its influence, and Saudi Arabia has developed major differences with the US. So this is what concerns the United States, and hence it's trying to convince the Saudis to work out a deal with Israel so that officially if they can set up ties and US can work with them, that will bring back American influence. Of course, Saudi Arabia and Israel are interested in this because covertly, secretly, they have been working together. At least from 1970s, US, Saudi Arabia and Israel, they have a secret relationship going on as far as their rivalry with Iran was concerned. But now, differences have come up between US and Israel and Saudi Arabia, and that is what is keeping them away from an official relationship. So the writer says that Saudi Arabia might accept the deal. It might go ahead and set up ties with Israel, but it has placed few conditions in front of the US. It has placed a few preconditions. If US can meet these conditions, maybe then Saudi Arabia would be willing to recognize Israel and establish permanent peace with Israel. According to reports, the conditions of Saudi Arabia are that Saudi Arabia is looking for a security guarantee, something like a NATO kind of guarantee. NATO countries have this principle called collective defense, where they promise to defend each other if they are attacked by another country. So it's looking for something like that, a security guarantee where US gives a commitment, a binding commitment, that it will come to the assistance of Saudi Arabia if Saudi Arabia is ever attacked. Saudi Arabia is also seeking access to advanced American weapons, including the latest fighter jets and naval technology and drones. It also wants assistance in civilian nuclear technology and wants a commitment from Israel to fulfill the two-state solution, to secure a country for Palestinians, which is their right guaranteed through the UN mandate. If these conditions are met from the US and Israel, then Saudi Arabia would definitely be willing to establish a peaceful relationship and to normalize the relationship. But however, there are these differences which prevail, but what the writer is saying is that they do have points of convergence. As I told you, they have common interests. They have been working together from many decades, especially in countering Iran, with regard to countering some of their regional rivals, targeting some terror groups in the region. They have worked together. Even today they have common interests, common convergence. But there are some differences. Their motivations are different on certain critical issues. For US, it's a priority to counter Chinese influence. For US, it's a priority to regain its dominant influence, and that's what is driving President Biden, because this will play a key role in his next elections. Is that clear? The Jewish lobby will play a critical role. And if US is not able to protect its West Asian influence, it will have a direct impact on US presidential elections. Even Saudi Arabia and Israel have their own interests, their own motivations to work together. But the problem is they all have different motivations. It's these differences which is keeping them apart. But if somehow US is able to convince them and bring them together, then this will have a profound global impact. It will reorder West Asian geopolitics. It will stabilize the region, and other countries, other Arab countries, they might follow the Saudi lead. Other countries which are yet to recognize Israel, could be Qatar, could be Kuwait, Pakistan, Indonesia, right, and many other Arab countries and Muslim countries, they could all go ahead, take Saudi's lead, and they might officially recognize Israel and set up ties with Israel. This will normalize the relations and stabilize the conflict, and it might even fulfill the rights of Palestinians, who might even get their own country if that were to happen. Right? So that would have profound global impact. But the other side of the argument is that it might weaken the Palestinian cause. Now many countries, they give direct support, diplomatic, legal, financial support to the Palestinian movement. This movement, this support might weaken if they set up ties with Israel, because Israel would put pressure on the other countries to not back the Palestinian cause. So the other impact would be that Israel might use the opportunity to pressurize other countries the other Arab countries and Muslim countries to not support the Palestinian cause. This could further create divisions in the Palestinian movement. It might radicalize some of the terror outfits such as Hezbollah, Hamas, which are sponsored by Iran and Syria, and it might even strengthen Islamic State in the region. Is that clear? Israel faces many threats. It's often targeted by Hezbollah and Hamas. Hezbollah operates in Lebanon. Is that clear? And Hamas operates in the Gaza Strip of Palestine. It's believed that Iran and Syria were sponsoring Hezbollah and Hamas as part of their rivalry and covert war with Israel. So the increasing polarization that might happen here in the Arab world might further radicalize these extremist groups, and it might even create a fertile space for Islamic State to rise. So this could be the potential impact, and the writer says it might even have a mildly positive impact on India. If Saudi Arabia, Israel were to recognize each other and establish ties with each other, it will make it easier for India to deal with them. India has a strategic partnership with these countries. Both the countries are crucial for India. Israel is a major defense supplier. We have very close relations in the field of science and technology as well, and there is a lot of collaboration between the two countries in several critical areas. Same with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is crucial for our energy security. It's still one of the top oil suppliers to India. It's home to a very large Indian diaspora. And as the leader of the Sunni Muslim world, it can influence other countries as well, like Kuwait, then Qatar and UAE and many other countries in the region, which are all crucial for our energy security and for the well-being of the Indian community in the Gulf region. Saudi Arabia is also a big source of investments into India. So any rapprochement between them, any normalization of ties between them will positively influence India, because we can freely go ahead and conduct our ties with both of them without being worried about what the other country will think. There was a point where India couldn't even recognize Israel or set up ties with Israel until 1992, because India was always worried that the Gulf countries and Arab countries might retaliate. Now that era is gone, that Cold War period is gone. Even though we have improved our ties with both of them, we still find it a little awkward and difficult to be close to both the sides. The same happens between Israel and Iran as well. If we get close to Iran, Israel will not be happy. If we get close to Israel, Iran will not be happy. So Indian foreign policy has been striking that balance. It's been walking the diplomatic tightrope from many, many years. Finally, we may stop doing that if these countries work out a settlement between them. Saudi Arabia, Iran already have worked out a settlement, and if Saudi Arabia and Israel were also to work out a settlement, that is the best news for India as far as West Asian geopolitics is concerned. It might create many opportunities, it might bring back American influence, and this could push back China, which is again good news for India. The economic and strategic influence of China might be set back with the revival of American influence, which is good news for India. Because we even work with US through platforms like I2U2 Summit. India, Israel, and US and UAE are partners in this summit, focusing on investments in the region. We are also working closely with Saudi Arabia, US and Israel to build connectivity projects. With a pushback to Chinese influence, that will be good news for India and Indian investments and projects in the region. But however, Israel then might start hyphenating our ties with other countries, particularly Pakistan. Right now, Israel is a complete supporter of India and India alone. It does not extend any support to Pakistan because Israel, Pakistan don't even have diplomatic ties. Pakistan does not recognize Israel. If Saudi Arabia were to recognize Israel, Pakistan might follow the lead. All the other Arab countries, Muslim countries might follow the lead. And if Pakistan were to become a diplomatic partner, then Israel's position might also slightly change, which could affect India, which could adversely affect India. Right? So these are the likely consequences, and that's exactly what the writer is bringing up. And given the changes that are happening in West Asia, it's very, very important to pay attention to these developments. You have to understand the background, the impact on the region, and how it affects or influences Indian interests or Indian foreign policy. Now coming to the next article, on page 10, we have this small article that refers to the Inter-Services Organization Bill 2023, which has been passed by the Lok Sabha yesterday. The topic is very relevant for internal security and defense under GS paper 3. So let's understand quickly what this bill is all about. The bill is officially known as Inter-Services Organizations Command Control Discipline Bill 2023. It has been introduced in the Lok Sabha, and the government is seeking to enact this law as soon as possible to carry out a major reform as far as the Indian Armed Forces are concerned. Now let me explain this clearly. See, as of now, the three armed forces, the Indian Army, the Navy and the Indian Air Force, they are governed by their respective legislations. The Army Act, Navy Act and the Air Force Act. Is that clear? The Indian Army, the Navy and Indian Air Force, their personnel, that is Army personnel, Navy personnel and the Air Force personnel, they are all governed and their service conditions are currently governed under their respective acts. Each armed force is set up through a certain parliamentary act, a parliamentary legislation, and those service rules will apply, those particular service rules will apply to each force and their personnel. Alright? Now let's say within the army, matters of promotion, transfers or even disciplinary action against officers or jawans who have broken the code or violated the norms and the practices, right? Ensuring accountability, right? All these measures are taken within the army according to the provisions of the Army Act only. Similarly, within the Navy, any matter related to personnel management, be it transfers, promotions, disciplinary action, punishments, court-martial, everything is handled as per the service rules of the Navy under the Navy Act. Similarly for the Air Force under the Air Act, the Air Force Act. Now, we do have a few tri-service organizations. We have a few inter-services organizations. Does anyone know a tri-service organization in India? Can you guys give me the name of any tri-service organization or inter-services organization? Anyone? Do you know the example of any tri-services command? Is there any unit which brings the three forces together where personnel from Army, Navy, Air Force are working under a single command? Good. Some of you are saying the Andaman Nicobar Command. Very good. The Andaman Nicobar Command is a tri-services command. Is that clear? So in a tri-services command, personnel from all three services are brought in. We also have the Defense Space Agency, Defense Cyber Agency, meant for space warfare and cyber warfare. These are tri-service agencies. We have Strategic Forces Command, which maintains control over India's nuclear arsenal, which eventually deploys India's nuclear arsenal. Even this is a tri-service command. These tri-service commands and agencies are essentially your inter-services organizations. Meaning, these are agencies and commands where soldiers from all three services are brought in. Personnel from the Army, Navy, Air Force, all three are brought in under a single unified command. Now the Commander-in-Chief or the officer in command of such an inter-services organization might be from the Army or Navy or Air Force. Correct? Now the problem is that under the current rules, the Commander-in-Chief of a tri-service agency or a command does not exercise disciplinary powers and administrative control over the personnel. Now let me give you an example. Let's say in the Andaman Nicobar Command, it's a command comprising of personnel from all three services, right? The Commander-in-Chief might be from the Indian Army. Now let's say a soldier from the Navy or Air Force, he or she breaks the law. They break the code and they have to be punished disciplinary action has to be taken against them. This power is not there with the commander-in-chief who is from the Indian Army, because the Navy personnel, Air Force personnel are still governed under their respective service rules, even when they are part of inter-services organizations. For disciplinary action to be taken against them and for administrative control and command over the unit, they have to be sent back to their parent armed force, and only under the respective rules they can be punished and disciplinary action can be taken against them. Now this weakens the command itself, right? The core principle in an armed force is discipline. If the commander-in-chief does not have disciplinary powers, how can he or she enforce the discipline? How can they regulate the conduct of the officers? Because they don't have administrative control, they don't have the disciplinary powers. That is the existing provision, because even under inter-services organizations, disciplinary action can be taken only under the concerned laws of the respective forces. Let's say the commander is from Navy and the Jawan who has committed the mistake is from the Army or Air Force. Then the commander cannot take disciplinary action against them. They have to be sent back to their parent force, and only under the service rules they can be punished. So this weakens their authority. It also leads to delays and inefficiency and affects the overall functioning and the structure of the tri-service agencies and commands. So to address this, this bill is being introduced. This new act, the Inter-Services Organizations Bill, is all set to become an act once passed with the Parliament, which provides the Commander-in-Chief the required disciplinary administrative powers over all the service personnel. Once the law is enacted, once it comes into force, the Commander-in-Chief of these tri-service commands will have complete disciplinary administrative powers over all the personnel. Now, Strategic Forces Command might be headed by an Air Force officer. He might be the Commander-in-Chief. He will have full disciplinary powers over all the personnel, even from Navy and Army, who are part of the Strategic Forces Command. Is that clear? This reduces the delays. It provides for quick punishments. It ensures the authority of the Commander-in-Chief, provides for effective discipline within these tri-service, inter-services organizations, and helps in quick disposal of cases. There's no need to send these personnel back to their forces for them to stand in trial and face their discipline and penalties and punishments. Within the tri-service, inter-services organization, they can be punished by the Commander-in-Chief, or administrative action can be taken against them. Is that clear? This is seen as an enabling step. This is seen as an enabling reform towards joint theatre commands. Have you heard of the word theaterization, or establishing jointness amongst the armed forces by creating integrated commands? This is a proposal which has been floating from a long time to modernize and restructure the Indian Armed Forces. Is that clear? Several committees have recommended the creation of jointness and creation of theatre-based commands. Right? This was pointed out by the Kargil Review Committee. It was reiterated by the Naresh Chandra Task Force. So major security-related committees have pushed for building jointness and creating integrated theatre-based commands. Which means in the future, instead of having a separate Army, Navy and Air Force, the forces will be pooled together, combined together to form theatre-based commands. Like you'll have a maritime command for all maritime operations. You will have a northern command to look after the Pakistani border. You will have a eastern command to look after the Chinese threat. A separate air defense command, logistics command. In fact, this has been a priority for the government and the armed forces and the defense ministry ever since the role of Chief of Defense Staff, or CDS, was created in 2019. In fact, this is the primary role of the CDS, to drive jointness between the three forces and set the path towards creation of theatre-based integrated commands. This will reduce our defense expenditure. It will reduce the overlap between the forces. It will reduce wasteful expenditure. It will bring efficiency into the forces, and it will bring jointness in their operations. Now, instead of having a separate air wing for the Air Force, the Navy and the Army, right? Everything can be fused. All the assets and personnel can be fused to form one single air defense command. Right? So that is the whole idea behind creation of theatre-based commands, and this bill will help the armed forces take a step towards the creation of jointness and creating joint structures. All right, this is already not reforming the rules. It's not changing the existing rules. It's only an enabling step. It's one of the initial steps being taken. It will pave the way for greater integration of the armed forces. And maybe some years down the line, you might see that you will not have an army, navy and air force anymore. Right? They will be replaced with theater-based commands by fusing the existing armed forces. So in that regard, this change being done is a landmark step, a very big step. That is why you should know about the Inter-Services Organizations Bill. So this completes my detailed discussion of all the big columns in today's newspaper. And now let's head towards the prelim section. We have plenty of articles, but very small articles, so we can quickly take a look at each of them. On page number 1, the Hindu carries this image which depicts a tribal dance form known as Kalbelia dance. Alright, this dance was performed at the National Folk and Tribal Festival, which is being held at Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. So I've chosen 2 topics from here, which is very, very important for your prelims. In fact, you can get such information not just from articles, but even from such images. Right? This is a clue for you, a hint regarding newspaper reading. Don't just focus on editorials and columns and big articles. Focus, pay attention to the smaller details in the newspaper. Look at small images which are there in the corners. Right? You might find very valuable information from here. So if you put in some extra effort and read about these topics, you will be able to easily answer any question that might come in prelims. Right? It's a very important topic under art and culture, because this dance form which you saw in the image, it is practiced by a very unique tribe in Rajasthan called the Kalbelia tribe. The dance is named after the tribe itself. The Kalbelia tribe are essentially snake charmers. They were a snake charming tribe. They would essentially catch snakes, train them as well. You would have seen snake charmers, right? The stereotypes associated with it, especially in Western countries as a result of colonial stereotypes that have been built, right? It traces back to the Kalbelia tribe, which is known as a snake charming tribe. They catch hold of snakes, they treat it as part of their myth, their culture. They extract the snake venom and sell the snake venom as well, which is part of their livelihood. That is how this tribe has sustained its livelihood. Alright? They would catch hold of the snake, use it for performances as well in front of the crowd and the public, and they would sell snake venom. They would harvest snake venom and sell it for medical purposes, which would fetch them some revenue and livelihood source. And since they were nomadic, it's a nomadic tribe as well. They keep moving from place to place historically. They're well versed with the forests, the plants. So they have a lot of knowledge on traditional herbal medicine as well, which has been their other form of livelihood source. So this is the primary occupation, the traditional occupation of the Kalbelia tribe. And the dance they perform is an integral part of their culture, performed by both men and women. So all the key points I'm going to highlight is very, very important for your prelims. They are followers of Sant Faninath or Sage Faninath, who is mythologically believed to have drunk a bowl of poison, which apparently blessed him with control over venomous snakes. They draw inspiration from this myth, this folklore, and that's what drives the community to be a snake charming tribe community. Right? This was their traditional occupation previously. The tribe is divided into 2 main groups depending on their prime location. It's called the Daliwal group and the Mewara group. Alright? It's essentially a nomadic tribe and they are categorized as a scheduled tribe. They have been given the ST status because of their backwardness. But over generations, as I told you, they have developed skills to harvest forest produce as well and harvest herbal medicines, which has been an alternate source of income for them. Now this traditional source of income of the tribe was disrupted by the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. The law which prohibited certain activities including catching hold of snakes right? Because snakes became protected species, right? It placed restrictions on harvesting minor forest produce as well, which would affect their ability to create herbal medicines. So this destroyed their livelihood. It disrupted their livelihood and their traditional profession was completely uprooted. So as a result, the tribe came to rely on their dance form. That was the only thing they were left with. As they couldn't continue snake charming or snake catching anymore or selling snake venom, they couldn't harvest minor forest produce and sell herbal medicines anymore. The only profession left for them was to use their dance, their traditional tribal art form, and perform this in order to generate a source of income for the community. Is that clear? That is the uniqueness of this tribe. Now coming to the dance that they perform, the Kalbelia dance, which is depicted here in the image, it's an integral part of their culture. It's an integral part of the Rajasthani society. Alright, it reflects the adaptation the community has gone through, the socio-economic difficulties they have faced, right? So the dancers are particularly women. Women are the ones who dance, men play the music. Please know the features of the dance form as well. You might even get a 10-mark mains question here. So the men play the music by using instruments like the pungi, which is a wooden instrument used to entrap the snakes, along with percussion instruments like the dole, the kanjari and the others. Alright? Whereas women, they dress up in these black skirts and a lehenga, right? The upper body cloth is called the angraki. The head cloth you can see here, it's called odhani, and the bottom is called the lehenga. They use a mix of red and black colors, and the dance form, the embroidery, is all a tribute to the serpent, to the snake. The movement, the dance form itself, and even the embroidery, the way in which the clothes are designed, it's all a tribute to the snake lord. It's all a tribute to the serpent itself, right? That is the prime feature of this dance form. So as the music tempo increases, the dance becomes faster and faster, replicating or depicting serpent-like movements or snake-like movements. That's why it's a very unique folklore, and it is recognized as intangible heritage by UNESCO. It's on the representative list of intangible cultural heritage, and it's recognized through the UNESCO itself. Is that clear? These are the key points you have to remember about the tribe and their dance form. Now the related topic would be the National Folk and Tribal Art Festival, which has been organized at Bhopal, which was inaugurated by the President just a few days ago. President Draupadi Murmu inaugurated the National Folk and Tribal Art Festival in Madhya Pradesh at Bhopal, and there are two components in this festival to celebrate our tribal and folk art and culture and literature. One part is called Utkarsh. The Utkarsh part of the festival celebrates tribal and folk expression art like dance, music, etc. That is the Utkarsh segment of the festival, which pays tribute and provides a platform for bringing out tribal expression forms like dance, music, etc. and folk art is brought out through Utkarsh. To promote tribal and folk literature, there's another platform under this festival called Unmesh. So Utkarsh and Unmesh are the two divisions within the festival, and it's organized by the Sangeet Natak Academy, Sahitya Academy under the Ministry of Culture and the Culture Department of the Maharashtra State Government, the Madhya Pradesh State Government. So please remember who's organizing the festival, what's the purpose, and what are the two parts of the festival. Utkarsh and Unmesh. Utkarsh for celebrating the tribal folk expressions and art forms like dance and music. Unmesh for celebrating tribal and folk literature. Is that clear? So please make a note of these key facts. They're all very, very important. Moving on page number 4, we have this article that refers to a type of cropping called Kuruvai crops. It's in the news because Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin, he has urged the central government to put pressure on Karnataka to release water from the Kaveri basin from major reservoirs like the Krishnarajasagar Dam, so that enough water flows down into the Tamil Nadu belt, into the Kaveri delta, where farmers depend heavily on the Kaveri river to grow this type of crop called the Kuruvai crops. So there could be a straightforward question asking what are Kuruvai crops, or in which region are Kuruvai crops grown. Kuruvai, the Tamil term, refers to short term, right? It's essentially a short term cropping season. These crops are grown usually in the monsoon season from June to July, and it's widely prevalent in the Kaveri river delta. Right from Tiruchirappalli to Tanjavur, Tirur, Nagapattinam, in this entire Kaveri belt, in the Kaveri delta, right? This is where the Kuruvai crops are grown. Essentially it is paddy. Paddy crops are sown, and these are short duration crops which can be harvested very quickly. But the key to the crop is that it has to be sown in the right season. Right? From June to July the sowing has to happen. Is that clear? So it heavily depends on the Kaveri river and the water flow in the Kaveri belt. So as part of the Kaveri dispute between Karnataka and Tamil Nadu has alleged that Karnataka is not releasing enough water, and hence the Kuruvai cropping season apparently has been affected in Tamil Nadu according to the state's chief minister. Is that clear? So Kuruvai means short-term cropping season or short-term crops like paddy, a type of paddy which is sown in the Kaveri river delta of Tamil Nadu. Got it? Next, we have an article on the same page that mentions the Manas Tiger Reserve or the Manas National Park in Assam. According to the article, there is good news and bad news for Manas Tiger Reserve. Recently, the All India Tiger Census data was published. According to the census data, tiger density and population has increased in the Manas Tiger Reserve. Now, this is a success of Project Tiger. Tiger population has gone up. It's good news for the protected area. But the bad news is that there is a shortage of staff. According to the Environment Ministry, the Tiger Reserve is facing a 63% shortage with regard to the sanctioned staff strength. There are so many vacancies, thereby affecting conservation efforts. Now, please don't forget that Manas Tiger Reserve is also a national park. It's a tiger reserve under Project Tiger, and also an elephant reserve under Project Elephant. So Assam has 7 major protected areas, and you can see the Manas National Park and Tiger Reserve right over here in the Brahmaputra Valley region. It's present right along the India-Bhutan border. It marks the international boundary as well between India and Bhutan. That's a very, very important point. It borders the Royal Manas National Park inside Bhutan. That's a shared habitat between India and Bhutan. It marks the international boundary and is located at the foothills of eastern Himalayas in the Brahmaputra belt, in the Brahmaputra valley. It's named after the Manas river, which is one of the major tributaries of the Brahmaputra, and this river passes right through the national park itself. It's home to many threatened, endangered, endemic species, and the vegetation you find here is semi-evergreen forests, moist, dry, deciduous forests, savanna woodland, and semi-evergreen alluvial grasslands. This is the prime vegetation that you find, and please don't forget, it's a biosphere reserve, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Please make a note, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it's a biosphere reserve, and it's home to the Indian rhinoceros, along with the tiger, the elephant, and many other threatened species of animals and plants. It's one of the most important protected areas in the country. Next, we have an article on page 6 that refers to the Kattupalli Port in Tamil Nadu. Kattupalli Port is managed by Adani Group, and there's a proposal to expand the commercial port facility, and this project has attracted a lot of criticism. According to the Environment Impact Assessment report, if the expansion of the Kattupalli Port is carried out, it will cause extensive damage to the coastal areas that could affect the livelihood of fishermen and as well as the coastal environment, including the Pulicat Lake that is present near the Kattupalli Port. So that is the context in which the port is in news, and you should know where it is located. Why is it important? The Kattupalli Port is located on the outskirts of Chennai. You can see here in the map, this is Chennai here. To the north of Chennai, you have Pulicat Lake on the borders of Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, right? right in between you have the Kattupalli Port. It's a major strategic port. You have a commercial transshipment terminal where commercial ships dock, bringing imports and sending exports from India, right? So the commercial part of the facility is managed by Adani Group, whereas there is a major shipwrecking facility as well, which is managed by L&T, by Larsen and Toubro. The shipwrecking plant, right? India has major plans for this to make it one of the biggest shipwrecking plants in the world, which will specialize in defense ships and submarines and in breaking them up and in repairing them. Is that clear? A ship repair yard and a wrecking yard is being built over here. And recently a major US naval ship came here for repairs. India's focus is on turning Kattupalli Port into a major defense ship repair center to make it a hub of the Indo-Pacific, where even foreign navies can bring their ships and submarines and even their aircraft carriers for rework and servicing and repair work. Is that clear? So this will give India a strategic footprint in the Indo-Pacific region. Is that clear? So that's a top priority along with the commercial expansion of the port. Next, on page 10, we have an article referring to the minimum age to contest elections in the country. Just few important facts. The Parliamentary Committee, the Standing Committee on Personnel, Public Grievance, Law and Justice, has suggested that the minimum age to contest elections should be reduced to 18 years. See, currently the voting age in India is 18 years. 18 years and above, right? They are considered as adults. They are considered to have enough maturity, political consciousness to go out and vote and exercise their democratic right. But however, the minimum age to contest elections is different in India. I hope you know that the minimum age to contest a Lok Sabha election or a state assembly election is 25 years. Whereas the minimum age to contest Rajya Sabha election and state council, legislative council election is 30 years. So according to the parliamentary panel, this does not make any sense. The parliamentary panel has urged the parliament and the election commission that if an individual is mature enough to vote, aren't they mature enough to lead the country, contest in elections, participate in democratic elections? That's the question the parliamentary panel has raised by comparing the model with other countries, other democracies. If you look at countries like Canada, UK, Australia, there the voting age and the age to contest elections is the same. But it's only in India that the ages are different. The election commission feels this is required because at the age of 18 or 20 or 23, election commission feels that the youth are not mature enough politically to contest elections and lead the country. But parliamentary panel does not agree with that. It has said if they are good to vote, they are good to contest elections as well. That is how you motivate the youth to develop political consciousness and become more active in our democracy. So it's a key argument being made by the parliamentary panel. So please remember the minimum voting age and the minimum age to contest elections for different houses in the legislature. Next, on page 12, we have an article referring to Digital Health Incentive Scheme under the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. According to the article, the National Health Authority, which administers and implements Ayushman Bharat and the Digital Mission, it has extended the deadline for Digital Health Incentive Scheme, which is part of Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. Under Ayushman Bharat, India has rolled out one of the world's biggest health insurance schemes, providing insurance coverage, health insurance coverage. And under that, we are promoting digital healthcare, digitization of health records as part of the Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. So to encourage the hospitals, the diagnostic labs, and all the healthcare institutions to digitize the health records, there is a dedicated scheme for that called Digital Health Incentive Scheme. It is part of Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, where all the healthcare facilities, be it clinics, hospitals, laboratories, diagnostic labs, they're all encouraged and incentivized. They can get incentives up to 4 crore rupees. Is that clear? If they digitize the patient's health records and provide that in digital format. So this will benefit Ayushman Bharat scheme. It will make it more efficient. It will reduce any inefficiency and leakages. it will make healthcare delivery more efficient, and it will improve the quality of healthcare, and it will also address any implementation or related issues within the Ayushman Bharat initiative. So as part of digitization of healthcare, the Digital Health Incentive Scheme is pushing for digitization of health records. So if the hospitals, the labs, they show interest and they take the effort, they will be compensated, they will be incentivized by the Government of India. The scheme was supposed to expire, but now the National Health Authority has decided to extend this till December 2023. Next, on page 13, we have another important port being mentioned, the Novorossiysk port in Russia. This port is in news because Ukraine has launched a major attack using sea-based drone against Russian warships that were docked at the Novorossiysk port. So you should know the location and the significance of this port. Is that clear? Of late, Ukraine has stepped up its attacks against Russian facilities using aerial drones. For example, the Kerch Bridge in the Kerch Strait over here that connects Crimean Peninsula with mainland Russia was targeted by Ukrainian drones and destroyed. So aerial drones were used in this attack. Now Ukraine has used sea drones, drones that pass through the waters, through the sea, which are remotely piloted, which are unmanned, and used this to strike a Russian warship, a major Russian warship that was docked at Novorossiysk port has been hit. Is that clear? This is a major facility for Russia. It's a naval base in the Black Sea, and it is also a major port for Russian oil and grain exports. Russia depends on the Novorossiysk port to send its oil and grain shipments and exports through the Black Sea, and it's also a naval base, so it's a critical facility, so you should be familiar with its location. These attacks are increasing because Russia has quit the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The Black Sea Grain Initiative, which allowed Ukraine to export its food grains. But Russia recently has quit the Black Sea Grain Initiative, thus threatening Ukrainian exports, and now Ukraine is stepping up the attacks against Russian facilities by targeting bridges and ports and naval bases by using unmanned vehicles. Alright, so please be aware of the location and the context in which the attack has happened. Next, today we have a lot of articles, but trust me, it's worth spending the time. Trust me, these topics can come as direct questions in your exams. The last two articles for today. Pakistan has taken a major step. Finally, it has passed a bill to tackle money laundering and terror financing. It has finally matched FATF standards. FATF, or Financial Action Task Force. It's an intergovernmental body established by the G7 countries in 1989 to implement anti-money laundering measures, to counter money laundering. After the 9/11 attacks in 2001, it was also given a mandate to implement anti-terror financing measures, to counter terror financing, because it's linked with money laundering. So since then, FATF is strictly providing for global standards, regulatory standards, which countries have to follow in order to counter money laundering and terrorist financing. Those countries which don't follow or implement, right, they can be penalized. FATF has the powers to put them on its grey list as a warning, and even after grey listing, if they don't improve, FATF can blacklist those countries, which will invite economic sanctions against those countries. So FATF is a very powerful body, and countries are expected to oblige and follow the standards by implementing suitable laws. Like for example, India has implemented the PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act. We have upgraded our Unlawful Activities Prevention Act to counter terror financing and money laundering. We have set up a dedicated authority to tackle money laundering, which is the ED, the Enforcement Directorate. We have set up Financial Intelligence Unit India, right? All these institutions have been created, required power, legal powers have been given through the PMLA Act, and this is all in line with FATF standards. But Pakistan had not followed these standards. That's why it had been repeatedly grey listed. Since Pakistan was not cooperating, not following the global standards, it had been grey listed once in 2008, again in 2012, and more recently in 2018. Every time it would show some minor improvement and then it would be removed from the grey list. So last year in 2022, Pakistan had been removed from the grey list again due to some minor improvements that it had shown. And now finally, because of the continued pressure, it has finally passed a bill that matches FATF standards, and Pakistan is establishing an authority like our Enforcement Directorate to tackle money laundering and terror financing. So that is the big development you have to take note of. The last point, the African country of Niger has suffered because of a coup attempt that recently took place. Africa has become very notorious of late, where multiple countries have seen such coup attempts where the military has illegally thrown out democratic governments and tried capturing power. Right? There are many countries where this has happened. In fact, in the last few years, in the last 6 years, there have been at least 20 plus coup attempts across Africa. From Niger to Mali, Sudan, Algeria, right? Many countries have seen the fall of democratic governments and the takeover by authoritarian military leaders and military dictatorship. So Niger has become the latest country. So you should know where Niger is located, because UPSC does focus on African coups and important African countries, especially in prelims for map-based questions. So Niger is in West Africa. Please make a note. The neighbors include Libya, Algeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Benin, Nigeria and Chad. It's present in the African Sahel region. This whole region is called African Sahel. All right? This whole region from the Atlantic to the Red Sea is called African Sahel. That is where Niger is located. And the biggest concern here is the rise of terrorism. Al-Qaeda and Islamic State both have gained a major presence in the Sahel in countries like Mali, Niger and Nigeria. You guys might have heard about terror groups like Boko Haram, a major terrorist outfit operating in Nigeria, which also has a presence in Niger. So Niger had a democratic government. It was the first democratic government in Niger. For the first time, the country had got a democratically elected president. But this first democratic government has been thrown out just few days back by the military dictatorship, and the military junta has captured power, and this is a major concern for all Western powers. Because West Africa was largely a French colony during colonial period. France had stationed many troops here in counter-terrorism operations along with US and UK. Even Germany, Italy, they all have stationed troops across West Africa to counter terrorism. Recently, France withdrew from these military operations because of the challenges that were coming in due to the military coups, which apparently has the support of Russia and its private mercenary group, the Wagner Group. So Wagner Group actually has welcomed and appreciated the military coup. So the takeover of such democratic governments by military dictatorships is very alarming news for the region. And the major groupings of the region have put sanctions on Niger. Major groupings like ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, the African Union and other important West African groupings, they've all imposed sanctions on Niger's military leadership in order to push them to restore democracy back in the country. Because without democracy, violence will increase, civil wars will break out, thus creating a fertile ground for radical terrorist outfits to flourish. So this is a concern not just for these countries, but even for India, which has big investments in Africa. Is that clear? So please be aware of these details. And with this, I would like to conclude my discussion for today. I know we have taken few extra minutes today, but trust me, it's worth it because we have covered a good 13 to 14 topics. The two in comprehensive detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper. I hope you guys have liked the session. Please take these questions for your mains answer writing practice. So that is it from my end. I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.